What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another UFC breakdown and predictions video, this time for UFC 304, Edwards versus Muhammad 2. Now, I didn't do a recap video for UFC Vegas 94, but in terms of how we did with our picks, not very good. We went 6-5, and previous to that in Denver, we went 5-6. So over the past two events, we are 11-11 on picks. Not very good. We definitely got to do better. We did really well in some of the events leading up to UFC Denver, but we've kind of fallen off there. Hopefully UFC 304 is nicer to us and we can make some good picks. It seems like a decent card. A couple of tricky spots, but I think we will be able to guess a lot of these correctly. Let's get into the breakdowns. Make sure you guys hit the like button, drop a subscription on the channel for more UFC content, and drop a comment down below. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this UFC 304 event, some of the matchups, your picks as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. First off, we have a UFC newcomer, Ardelean, going up against Bannon. Now, this was originally supposed to be Bannon versus Ravina Oliveira, where I was going to be on the Bannon side, but I'm going to be going with Alice, the UFC newcomer, to get it done. I don't think either of these ladies are top tier. Obviously, as we know, women's MMA is really tough to gauge and make a pick on because it could honestly end up going anywhere, such as some heavyweight fights. It's very tough to predict what will happen in these kind of matchups. Now, Bannon is probably going to be the more technical striker. She has that like taekwondo bouncy stance. She likes to kick out that lead leg and chip away at the body with those side kicks, and she does that pretty well. The only thing is, Alice is a kind of pressure in your face fighter that isn't going to really allow Bannon to utilize that side kick effectively. She's going to be in your face. She's going to put that pressure on you. And if I'm going with the danger factor on who I can trust more to go for a finish or try to damage their opponents, it's going to be the Alice Ardelean side. Bannon, in her Brasil UFC debut matchup, she was really content with just kind of point fighting with Bruna throughout that fight and hoping that she gets a win on the judges' scorecards. With somebody like Alice, she comes in to fight and try to finish her opponent. A lot of people are hating on her 9-5 record, but if you kind of look closely into that, she was 4-5 on her pro record. She is on a 5-fight win streak, and that doesn't include the 2 exhibition matches that she had on a show. I think The Fighter, it's similar to The Ultimate Fighter, I would assume, but she got a win on both of those in both of those exhibition matches as well. So she has 7 wins in a row. 5 pro wins, like officially on her record. So she hasn't lost in quite some time. Let me take a look. Her last loss was actually Zhang Weili back in 2016. So since then, she has 7 wins. And obviously, it's not against the upper echelon fighters in terms of skill level, but Bannon really hasn't fought anybody to a crazy caliber either. So it's not like she's going to be outmatched. If anything, Alice has the experience advantage in this matchup. So she's also an underdog. And you got to love women's MMA underdogs because the odds are hardly ever that far apart. It's typically a 50-50 fight, and I'm going to go with Alice to get it done because I think she has a more danger factor. I don't think Bannon is very good. Don't think Alice is very good either, but I think she's going to be the one coming forward trying to finish this fight. So give me Alice Ardelean to start things off. Let's move on to the next fight. We got a heavyweight bout. Parkin going up against Brzeski. Now, I'm pretty sure this is going to be the fight order. The fight order has been mixed up a lot, but as of right now, the second fight on the card is Parkin versus Brzeski, and here's another kind of like low-level-ish fight. Parkin is actually a decent heavyweight with some solid skills, but the problem is, even though he has the skill set to beat his opponents, he has a tendency to make fights close, which I don't really like because I want to see that danger factor. I want to see him go out there and try to put away his opponents in dominant fashion. But going up against somebody like Brzeski, I think this is set up for him to get a win at home in England for this UFC 304 card. I don't think Brzeski is that good, but I do see some glimpses of high-level skills against somebody like Parkin. I think he can throw out that jab. I think he can gauge the distance on somebody like Brzeski, who I think is the bigger, like in terms of maybe the longer striker, 78-inch reach compared to, 1 second here, compared to 79. So actually Parkin has the reach advantage, which is crazy. He doesn't look like the bigger fighter, but I think he's going to be able to distance the range, and if anything, I can see Mick Parkin working in some takedowns as well and wrestling somebody like Łukasz Brzeski. So I think Parkin's just a better fighter. This is a low-level fight. It could honestly go anywhere, but I do trust Parkin to get another win at home. I think that's kind of what the UFC set up here because they're in the UK, and Parkin obviously a native of that from there. So I think Mick Parkin gets this done. Let's move on to the next one. Sam Patterson going up against Kiefer Crosbie. Now, this one's a little trickier because we have seen in the 2 fights that Sam Patterson has had in the UFC, we've seen him get chinned in his debut against Yanal Ashmouz, and then we saw him submit Johan Lainez in his sophomore outing in the first round. So the reason why this is interesting is because Kiefer Crosbie is very similar to an Ashmouz and a Lainez in the way of he's not a very high-level opponent, but he has power to KO you. And somebody like Patterson, who is hittable, it's kind of difficult to be confident in him when he can get tagged and he can get chinned. And somebody like Kiefer Crosbie has the power to put him away. So why this is interesting is we've seen him fight 2 opponents similar to Crosbie already. One was an outcome of him getting KO'd. The other one was him adjusting and taking his opponent down and submitting them, taking away that threat of the power. So I think I am going to go with Patterson to have a similar victory over Crosbie that he did against Johan Lainez. I think he adapted well from the Ashmouz fight. I think he'll realize that the only way Crosbie can really beat him is if he ends up tagging him early on in this fight when he holds the most power. So I think Patterson does the same thing he does to Johan that he did to Johan Lainez. I think he waits for that big bomb. I think he ducks under, gets a takedown, and eventually finds a submission on Kiefer Crosbie because Crosby's actually coming off of a rear naked choke first round loss to Kevin Jousset, and I think Sam Patterson has the skills to do the same thing to him. Obviously, this is a little bit scarier because Patterson is quite a big favorite from what I've seen. And Kiefer Crosbie could land that one shot that puts him away. We've seen it before in the UFC. But I think I trust Sam Patterson to have adjusted from that Ashmouz fight. We saw the adjustments in the Johan Lainez fight, and I think he does something similar here against Crosbie. So I will take Sam Patterson by submission against Kiefer Crosbie. Let's keep rolling. We have 14 total fights, so hopefully we don't stretch this out too long. We're ripping through it. Let's keep going now. This next fight right now is Muhammed Mokaev Manel Kape. I'm kind of shocked that this fight is so low on the card. But for right now, this is apparently the fight order. So we got Muhammed Mokaev going up against Manel Kape, and we know Mokaev's style. He has that Dagestani wrestling, and that's what he wants to do in his fights. We've seen it. He wants to wrestle, and hopefully work in a submission eventually in his fights. Now, Manel Kape is a well-rounded fighter. He's going to be miles ahead of Mokaev on the feet. Mokaev kind of looks lost on the feet. We've seen him struggle in that department in his fights, especially in his last fight against somebody like Alex Perez, who is a UFC veteran at this point with a lot of experience, similar to Manel Kape. So I am actually going to be picking Manel Kape to give Mokaev his first loss. And to be honest, I don't even know if this fight's going to happen because Manel Kape pulls out, or he has such bad luck with canceled fights. So we'll see how it ends up going. But I will pick him as of right now to give Mokaev his first loss. And the reason for that, like we mentioned, Muhammad Mokaev is kind of lost on the feet. Manel Kape is going to be miles ahead in the striking department, and even though Mokaev has that chain wrestling style, I think Kape can fend off some of the takedowns and do most of the damage when the fight's on the feet. Mokaev relies heavily on his grappling and the control, and I think Kape is going to be able to fend off most of them and do the more impactful damage, land the more impactful strikes rather on the feet, because like I said, Mokaev is kind of lost up there. A lot of his UFC fights recently, we've seen him in the Alex Perez fight. He struggled to get Perez down as many times as he wanted to. Perez was able to land some good shots on the feet. He did ultimately win that fight. A lot of people disagreed with that, with the decision. Regardless, he ended up getting the win. Before that, the Tim Elliott fight, he ended up getting a Hail Mary submission in the third round. Tim Elliott was controlling him, was winning the fight over the first 2 rounds, but then Mokaev ended up getting an arm triangle choke in that third round. The fight before that, Jafal Filho, same idea. He was struggling with the grappling of Filho. He actually, I don't know how he didn't tap from that knee bar. That was one of the deepest knee bars I've ever seen, and Mokaev, kudos to his toughness. He didn't end up tapping, and he ended up getting a third round submission in that fight as well. In the Malcolm Gordon fight, same thing. This guy was struggling with Malcolm Gordon, which is probably the lowest level flyweight you could possibly go up against. They were trying to throw him a layup, and he ended up looking worse than he did in the first 2 fights of his career against tougher opponents. He had Durden and Charles Johnson before that. Ended up getting wins against them, but then struggled against Gordon. Again, another Hail Mary third round submission. So Mokaev isn't as dominant as his record shows. He is 6-0 in the UFC, and kudos to him. He's only 23 years old, but he does struggle early on, and I think somebody like Kape can expose him on the feet. I think he's going to give him problems just like his previous opponents did, but I don't see Mokaev landing that last-minute sort of Hail Mary submission against somebody like Kape, so I will take Manel Kape here. I think he kind of humbles Mokaev, and it's not going to be that big of a deal because Mokaev is going to soon be 24 years old. He's still very, very young, and he has the skill set to evolve and continue finding success in the UFC, but I think Kape gets it done here. Let's keep going. Up the card, we got Oban Elliott going up against Preston Parsons here. Now, other than raw toughness, I think Preston Parsons is the overall better fighter here. Elliott is extremely tough, and he never quits. The problem is he's not very skillful in terms of fighting. He has that grit, he has that determination to become victorious at the end of the fight, but in terms of skill, I don't think he's the better fighter in this matchup. Preston Parsons puts a fantastic pace on his opponents. His nickname is Pressure, and that's for a good reason. I think in this fight, Preston is going to land the takedowns, solidify some control time on the ground, and eventually work in a submission against Oban Elliott. Like I said, I think at this point of Elliott's career, the only thing that really stands out is his grittiness, is his toughness. But against somebody like Parsons, who has a solid overall skill set, I think he's going to suffer the takedowns. I think Parsons is going to put a quick pace on him, lots of pressure, and it's going to be too much for Oban to deal with. I will take Preston Parsons here to find a submission eventually. And yeah, that's basically my breakdown for this fight. I'll take Parsons by sub. Let's continue on. We got a low-level light heavyweight fight. Modestas Bukauskas going up against Marcin Prachnio. Now, this fight I was kind of teeter-tottering with. I wanted to go with Bukauskas, and then I wanted to go with Prachnio, and then I was like, maybe I'll go with Bukauskas, but I think I am landing on the Marcin Prachnio side after watching some tape, and the reason for that is I like the pace and the pressure and the volume from Prachnio. The Bukauskas can be low volume at times, and towards the end of his fights, he is content with kind of just like laying on his pressuring his opponents up against the cage and kind of holding them there to finish the fight. I think Marcin Prachnio, nearing the end of a fight, he pushes the pace and he keeps moving forward and kind of putting that in the judges' minds that I'm the one moving forward, I'm the one continuing to scrap. So I really like that from Prachnio. Modestas, like we mentioned, is low volume. The most strikes he's landed in a UFC fight is 58. Prachnio has eclipsed the 100 strike mark, I think, twice in his UFC career. He's just going to, so 101 and 102 he's had in his in 2 of his UFC fights. Like I said, I just think Prachnio is going to be the one pushing the pace. I think he's going to give the judges more to score. He's going to be the one in Bukauskas' face pushing the pace. I think I'm repeating myself, but regardless, I think Prachnio is just going to be giving the judges more to score here. Bukauskas is content with kind of like sitting on the outside and countering his opponents, and somebody like Prachnio, who I believe has a combat karate background, he's going to be the more technical striker as well. If Bukauskas does decide to kind of clinch up and try to do some wrestling in this matchup, Prachnio has a solid takedown. He has solid takedown defense, and he has the better cardio because he does push the more of a pace, and he doesn't seem to be the one typically in the third round gassing. Bukauskas does seem to slow down as the fight continues, and I don't know how he's going to do against a pace and the pressure of somebody like Prachnio. So I will take Marcin Prachnio as the underdog here. Let's keep rolling. This is the 7th fight of the card. I think we're almost halfway done. So Jake Hadley going up against Loughran here. And I'm going to go with Loughran to get this done. Jake Hadley is taking this on short notice. He's taking this up a weight class as well. Typically, he is a flyweight. And even at 125, he does seem to struggle with the physicality of his opponents. And going up against a bantamweight, a big bantamweight in Loughran, who already has that kind of wrestling style where he's going to be top heavy, he's going to get you down to the ground, and he's okay with being boring. This guy knows that he wants to come in and get wins, and he's content with doing that. I think he closes the distance. I think he wrestles with Jake Hadley early. I think he holds him down on the mat. And even though Jake Hadley came into the UFC with as this kind of like grappling specialist and somebody that has that good jiu-jitsu, we haven't really seen that in the UFC as of yet. So I will take Loughran to close that distance, get those takedowns, be top heavy, and kind of like just wear down Jake Hadley throughout this fight. Like we mentioned, Jake Hadley's taking this on short notice, so I think the cardio advantage will be on the Loughran side, and he already struggles with physicality down at flyweight, so I could not imagine Loughran not being able to get those takedowns and just holding them down. So I will take Loughran to get this done. Let's keep rolling. We got Molly McCann going up against Bruna Brasil here. Now, I do completely agree with Bruna Brasil being a live underdog in this matchup because she is a great technical striker. She also has decent jiu-jitsu as well, but I am going to be siding with the Molly McCann side, and the reason for that is how dialed in she looked in her last fight against Diana Belbita was kind of scary. She knew what she was coming in to do, and she executed it perfectly in under a round, just under the first round mark. I think it was a 4-minute 59-second submission. It was an armbar, I believe, and I think she has a clear path to victory here. Bruna Brasil struggled in her last fight, I believe, against Loma Lookboonmee, and like I said, clear path to victory. You wrestle and control her on the ground. Take away that striking threat that she has, because she is going to be the better striker in this matchup. And Loma Lookboonmee kind of set a game plan for Bruna Brasil's future opponents. And Molly McCann can do exactly that. She can close the distance, get those takedowns, and control Bruna Brasil on the mat. I don't know if a finish is in the cards for Molly McCann in this fight, but I think the wrestling is going to be the difference here, because even if it stays on the feet, I understand Brasil is the more technical and probably the better striker, but McCann is no slouch on the feet either. She isn't a crazy striker. She doesn't have these crazy skill sets in any facet of the game, but I think she can hang on the feet with Brasil, and if she ends up engaging in that wrestling, I think she's the far better wrestler. She'll have that control on the mat as well, so I will take Molly McCann. Like I said, I don't know if she gets a finish, but I will trust her to mix in the wrestling and get a win at home in the UK. Next up, we got Nathaniel Wood going up against Daniel Pineda. Now, the reason I am not like all in on Nathaniel Wood in this matchup, I think he's the far better fighter anywhere the fight goes. I'm a big fan of Nathaniel Wood. He's just a great overall fighter, but the problem is going up against somebody like Daniel Pineda. Daniel Pineda has 28 career wins, and all of those wins are by finish. So he's a very dangerous opponent. And the problem with that is Nathaniel Wood doesn't have much of a chin. We see him get tagged in basically every single one of his fights. Kudos to him for being able to fight through that and end up winning some of those matchups. But it is quite concerning that his chin does not hold up. If he gets landed on cleanly, if his opponent lands flush on his chin, he will get wobbled, he will get stunned, and that is a problem against somebody like Pineda, who is a dangerous opponent. Now, most of Pineda's finishes are submissions, but I haven't watched all of Pineda's fights, but I would assume that some of them came from a big shot that landed, a club and sub, if you will. So Nathaniel Wood, if he had a better chin, he would be a very confident pick for me this week. But I do worry. I am concerned about that chin. He does get wobbled in his fights, like we mentioned. He doesn't have much durability. But in terms of straight skills, he is better. He is just a better fighter in this matchup. There's no debating that. Anywhere the fight goes, he will be the more technical and the better overall fighter. I just worry about that chin, but I will be picking Nathaniel Wood. Let's keep moving. I think we're about to enter the main card here. Make sure you guys hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe for more UFC content and drop your comments down below on this UFC 304 card. Kicking off the main card for UFC 304 is Arnold Allen versus Giga Chikadze. Now this is tough for me because I love both of these fighters. I'm a big fan of both of them, but I think it's a pretty easy pick on the Arnold Allen side. Reason being is Giga Chikadze, yes, he's a very talented and dangerous kickboxer. He's 35 years old now, which is getting up there for the featherweight division. And he's going to have trouble using that technique, that kickboxing technique, the technical kickboxing against somebody like Arnold Allen, because Arnold Allen is not afraid to enter the pocket and throw himself into the fire. He will push that pace. He'll get in your face and throw heavy shots. And if this was Giga Chikadze pre-Calvin Kattar, maybe I would be on the Giga Chikadze side. But since that Kattar fight, he got absolutely destroyed. I believe it was over a 5-round fight. But he's only fought once since then, and that was against Caceres. Yes, he won that fight, but he looked very hesitant, and he wasn't really himself. It was a very closely contested fight that some people had Alex Caceres winning. I think Arnold Allen would kick the shit out of Alex Caceres. I don't even think it's going to be a close fight, but I don't think Giga is the same since that Kattar fight. I think he's going to be very hesitant, and against somebody like Arnold Allen, I don't think that's going to bode well for him. I think Arnold Allen pushes the pace. He lands the better shots, lands the more impactful shots in this matchup, because like I mentioned, Giga's not going to be able to use that kickboxing technique against somebody that's just constantly pushing the pace and constantly in your face. And I think that's exactly what Arnold Allen does. And also, I think Arnold Allen will be the one to mix in the wrestling if he wants to, and I think I think that will kind of take Giga off of his game. I think Arnold Allen will find success in the wrestling department as well, but I do believe Allen lands the better shots. I think Giga is going to be a little bit hesitant going up against somebody like Arnold Allen, so I will take Arnold Allen to get this done to start off the main card for UFC 304. Next up, we got a middleweight bout. Christian Leroy-Duncan going up against RoboCop Gregory Rodrigues. Now, this was another one that I was kind of like on the fence about. I was initially going to go with Christian Leroy-Duncan, and I think I'm going to stick to my guns and pick him to get this done, and solely based off of technical striking ability. Both of these guys are dangerous on the feet. Both of these guys have knockout power. But the difference, I think, will be if Gregory Rodrigues can implement that wrestling like he usually does, he will be the better fighter on the mat. He has better wrestling. He has better jiu-jitsu. Christian Leroy-Duncan solely wants to stay on the feet. And if you look at previous matchups, Christian Leroy-Duncan was taken down by Armen Petrosyan, another striker, and was held down on the mat for about 3 or so minutes in that fight, which is not a good look, because if Petrosyan can do that to you, Gregory Rodrigues will be able to do that to you as well. He's a physical specimen, and he has the power to KO Leroy-Duncan also. But the thing, I think Leroy-Duncan is only 28 years old, so he's not even in his prime yet. I think he's going to be better. He's going to be evolving every single time he enters that octagon. And even though Gregory Rodrigues is only 32, which is crazy, the guy looks like regardless, he's only 32, so he's not old by any means, especially for the middleweight division. But I think Leroy-Duncan kind of took away from that Petrosyan fight and realized, okay, if I'm going to find success in the UFC, I really have to work on my takedown defense, and I have to keep things standing because I am the better, more technical striker than most people in the middleweight division. And I think that's going to be the difference here against RoboCop. I think Duncan's technical striking will be superior to that of Gregory Rodrigues. Both these guys have the power to KO each other, which is concerning when you're making a pick, but I think the technique of Christian on the feet is going to be the difference. I think he realized his weakness, which was that takedown defense, and although Rodrigues may find a takedown, a takedown or two. I think Duncan lands the better strikes on the feet. And I'll go as far as to say that Christian finds a KO. Rodrigues has been chinned before. He's been KO'd 3 times in his career, I believe. And any of the big shots that Duncan lands could put Rodrigues away. And that'll be my official pick. Christian Leroy-Duncan to find that KO against RoboCop. Let's move on to the featured fight of the night. We got King Green. Bobby Green has officially changed his name to King. Going up against Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. Now I'm going to be referring to Green as Bobby because I'm not calling him King. Regardless, Bobby Green, we know this is going to be, this fight right here is your typical striker versus grappler matchup. Green obviously being the striker and Paddy being the grappler. Now a lot of people think that Bobby Green, because he has a really good takedown defense, I think he's like 77% over his UFC career, which is fantastic because it is not a small sample size. Bobby Green has fought in the UFC 25 times, including his draw and no contest. And to have a 77% takedown defense is fantastic. It's tremendous. Now on the Paddy Pimblett side, he's not that good of a wrestler. He is a jiu-jitsu specialist. He's a grappler. So to get his opponents down on the ground, sometimes he struggles. And in the UFC, in terms of his striking, it hasn't been very good. Paddy comes in wild, throwing heavy, but he keeps his chin way up in the air. His chin is there to get tagged, and somebody like Bobby Green will find that chin. He is one of the best boxers in the UFC, even at his age of 37. But the thing is, I think a lot of people are putting a lot of stock and keeping up Bobby Green's stock really high because of his absolute annihilation of Jim Miller in that fight. He landed 180-something strikes over 15 minutes, which is absurd, absolutely absurd. And even though I had Jim Miller in that fight, I think a lot of people are keeping that win like way up here. I just can't get behind Bobby Green at this point of his career. He is, like I said, he's going to be miles ahead of Paddy Pimblett on the feet. His boxing is not even comparable to Paddy Pimblett. But I think Paddy closes the distance, clinches up, gets some trips, gets Bobby down to the ground, and chews up a lot of the clock down there. I think I'll go as far as saying as Pimblett finds a submission as well. A lot of things that people, because Bobby is so good on the feet, his chin it's compromised. His chin is compromised. He gets tagged a lot in his fights because he has that hands down style, and he doesn't really keep his guard up. He kind of relies on head movement to avoid shots from his opponents, and even though that will probably work against somebody like Pimblett who doesn't have the hands to keep up with Green, Paddy Pimblett's still only 29 years old, and he has 24 career fights. So even though Bobby is the more experienced fighter, Paddy Pimblett's been in the cage a lot as well, and I think that's going to help him in this matchup. I don't think Paddy entertains the striking exchanges as much as people may think, even though he has in the past. I think he brushed up on some of his skills. I think he'll use his striking to set up those takedowns, and he probably won't just be shooting singles or doubles out and open. I think he gets Bobby up against the cage, clinches up, grabs like a body lock or something, and ends up getting more trip takedowns than anything. But I do trust that Paddy comes in, finds a way to get Bobby to the ground, and kind of overwhelm him with that top pressure, with that grappling, and get a win at home. I think that's how it's going to go down. I think Paddy will even find the chin of Bobby at some point, because Bobby, as much as you want to rely on your head movement, he's 37 now. He's not going to be faster. He's not going to be the faster opponent. But yeah, I'm going to be going with Paddy Pimblett. I may come to regret this, but I think he finds a submission. Let's move on to the co-main event. These next two fights are going to be easy breakdowns for me, and I can't believe we're only 29 minutes in. That is crazy. We're ripping through this breakdown video, but Tom Aspinall will be defending his interim belt against Curtis Blaydes. Now, you guys know this is a rematch, quote-unquote rematch. Their first fight only lasted 15 seconds, where Aspinall blew up his knee off of a leg kick against Blaydes. Now, I had Curtis Blaydes in that fight. I'm not going to say, wow, that's crazy. Look how I guessed Curtis Blaydes, because it was a freak accident that can happen to anybody. But Tom Aspinall is going to be my pick this time around, because Curtis Blaydes, even though he was known in the UFC for his wrestling, he's kind of abandoned that in his career. He hasn't, he hasn't really shot a takedown in like 3 years. So he's been developing his striking, and that's kind of what he wants to show in his fights. That's what he's been doing in his most recent fights. And sometimes it's worked out for him, sometimes it hasn't. So you go and you look at the Jailton Almeida fight. His hands didn't really go on display there, because he was ragdolled for the first 5 minutes, and then while Almeida was hanging on for dear life, he kind of hit him behind the ear or something like that in one of his strikes, and that didn't really show off his striking. In the Sergey Pavlovich fight, he tried to test out his striking, and we all know how that went. Tom Aspinall, 15 seconds. He knocked out Chris Daukaus, and that's where I think the striking, that's where he fell in love with the striking, because he put him away in 17 seconds in that second round. So Curtis Blaydes has kind of abandoned that wrestling. And if I could trust that he was more all in on the wrestling against somebody like Tom Aspinall, I probably would pick him, even though Aspinall is a fantastic, well-rounded fighter. He has a tremendous skill set, especially at heavyweight. And the reason why I'm blabbering on about this is, if Curtis Blaydes decides to stand with somebody like Tom Aspinall, I do not think this is even remotely close. Tom Aspinall is one of the fastest heavyweights we've ever seen in the UFC ever. He has the power to back it up as well. And I think if Curtis Blaydes decides that he wants to strike with Aspinall, it is going to be an early night for him. We saw what Aspinall was able to do on short notice against Pavlovich. And I don't see this lasting very long. I think Aspinall has an average fight time of like 2 minutes or something seconds. Me and my cousin were just talking about it last night. Aspinall is going to be way better on the feet. And I don't trust that Blaydes is going to wrestle. I think he wants to prove a point and not just be known as a wrestler. I don't know why that bothers people when you're winning. Why does that matter? You know what I'm saying? If you're winning, people are going to love you. They're going to want to, especially if you're doing it in dominant fashion. If you're taking opponents down, submitting them, or just beating the shit out of them. That's why everybody loved Jailton Almeida. Almeida doesn't have this crazy, exciting style, but because he comes in and exploits his opponents and just does what he knows he can do, that's why people like watching him. He ragdolls his opponents and just finishes them. Curtis Blaydes should probably wrestle in this matchup. I don't trust that he does. I think Tom Aspinall absolutely destroys him on the feet. Let's move on to the main event of the evening. We got Leon Edwards going up against Belal Muhammad, and I don't want bias to play into this, but I am a huge fan of Leon Edwards, not so much of a fan of Belal Muhammad. And I understand there's a clear path to victory for Belal. He's been training with the Nurmagomedovs up in the mountains of Dagestan, and I understand that he is dominant in that regard. But he's not a very dangerous fighter. He has 26 fights, 23 wins, and only 6 finishes. Not a dangerous fighter whatsoever. Leon Edwards, on the other side, has proven to me that he can deal with wrestlers. He's proven it. He beat Covington. He's beat Kamaru twice now, even though in the knockout, the head kick that we all loved, and one of the craziest moments in UFC history for me, in terms of like impactful moments, he was getting ragdolled in that, not ragdolled, but he was getting wrestled in that fight, and he couldn't really deal with it. The second time around, he adjusted very well and was able to deal with Usman's wrestling pressure. Covington, same thing. Now the problem is neither of those guys have the pressure of Belal. Belal will not give up on those takedowns. He will constantly be in your face, and he will constantly be working towards getting the fight down to the ground. Now, even though I do see Muhammad probably finding success with that early, I don't think it's going to be even close on the feet. People want to praise him for his finish against Sean Brady. Good for him. That is a great win to have, especially as a finish. But Sean Brady isn't known for his striking. Sean Brady's known for his grappling. Yes, he beat Gilbert Burns over 25 minutes. But if you guys remember, Gilbert Burns tore his shoulder or something early on in that fight in the first round or something like that. Now, neither of these guys have lost for quite some time. The last loss for Belal Muhammad was Jeff Neal back in 2019. Leon Edwards, the last time he lost was to Kamaru Usman back in December of 2015. I just think that Edwards has seen fighters like Belal before. I think he's going to just be way better on the feet. I know this is a rematch as well, but in their first fight, Leon Edwards was on his way to a win. That gruesome eye poke, blah, 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 blah. Regardless, you can't really go off of that because that was like 3 years ago. Both of these guys have evolved since then. And honestly, it's going to be a close fight. And if it ends up going 25 minutes and it's remotely close, I do not think the judges, I don't think the UFC wants to see Belal as the UFC champion because he's quite boring. And that's not what's going to sell tickets, because as a champion, you are going to headline pay-per-views. I think Leon, despite him not being like this crazy finisher either, I think he has the more exciting style. He wants to sit there and he wants to strike with his opponents. And that's what fans want to see. Unless, like I said, unless you're wrestling and just absolutely dominating your opponents. We want to see that too. But Belal doesn't do that. Belal just kind of lays in praise for as long as he possibly can. He doesn't really hold much danger factor. I think Edwards absolutely pieces up Muhammad on the feet. I think Edwards can fend those takedowns for the most part. I think Belal will find some takedowns. I'm not saying that Leon won't get taken down in this fight, but I was impressed with how his takedown defense has evolved. I think that's all he's going to be working on in this camp, because his striking is already tiers above Belal. But I do recognize that Belal can easily land those takedowns and just kind of wrestle Leon Edwards for 25 minutes. I just don't see that being the majority of this fight. I think Edwards fights off those takedowns. I think he pieces up Belal on the feet, damages him. Hopefully there's no eye pokes, because I will shit myself if we see another eye poke no contest. Regardless, Leon Edwards will be my pick. I think both guys will defend their titles at home. That's going to be the entire breakdown. We absolutely crushed it. 14 fights, 36 minutes. Beautiful. Let's go back like we usually do at the end of our videos and look at our picks. We got Ardelean, Mick Parkin, Sam Patterson, Manel Kape, Preston Parsons, Marcin Prachnio, Colin Loughran, Molly McCann, Nathaniel Wood, Arnold Allen, Christian Leroy-Duncan, Paddy Pimblett, Tom Aspinall, and Leon Edwards. Thank you guys so much for watching another video of mine, another UFC breakdown video. Make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for more UFC content, and drop a comment down below on what you think of the UFC 304 event, whether you agree or disagree with my picks. I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.